The last confirmed sighting of Oakley Carlson was on February 10, 2021, in Oakville, Washington. At the time, she lived with her parents, Andrew Carlson and Jordan Bowers, along with her siblings. Despite Oakley's disappearance, her parents never reported her missing. Instead, it was Jessica Swift, a local school principal and the mother of Oakley's sister's friend, who ultimately raised the alarm. In November 2021, a fire broke out at the Carlson family's home, causing significant damage. Oddly, Andrew and Jordan never called the fire department, claiming they couldn't find their phones. On November 10th, Swift visited the family to offer help, staying for about 45 minutes. During her visit, she noticed Oakley wasn't there and found it unusual. When she asked about Oakley's whereabouts, Andrew and Jordan told her that Oakley was being punished and confined to her room. 2 weeks later, Swift stopped by again to drop off supplies, but didn't see Oakley then either. On December 4th, Oakley's sister stayed over at Swift's house for a sleepover. During the visit, Swift asked the girl about Oakley. The child became upset and said, "Oakley is no more." When pressed further, she claimed Oakley had gone to live with her former foster parents. Alarmed by this information, Swift contacted the police the next day, requesting a welfare check on Oakley. The authorities tracked down the family at a hotel in Tumwater, Washington, where they were staying due to the fire. Oakley wasn't there. When questioned, Andrew claimed she was with his parents, but couldn't provide any contact details. When police contacted Andrew's father, he revealed he hadn't seen Oakley since Christmas. When investigators informed Andrew that Oakley wasn't with his parents, he didn't seem surprised. Meanwhile, Jordan refused to cooperate or answer any questions. Police then searched the family's Oakville home, but found no signs of Oakley or any evidence suggesting she had been living there recently. Unlike her siblings, Oakley didn't have a bedroom, and there were no clothes or toys belonging to her in the house. During interviews with Oakley's siblings, they revealed disturbing details. They mentioned that their mother had instructed them not to talk about Oakley. One sister claimed Jordan had told her Oakley had gone into the woods and been eaten by wolves. The younger brother recounted incidents of Jordan beating Oakley with a belt and locking her in a closet. He expressed fear that his sister might have starved. He also remembered the night of the fire, saying that everyone escaped the house safely, except Oakley. Initially, the couple was arrested on suspicion of manslaughter, but was not charged. Instead, they faced charges of second-degree abandonment of a dependent person. This charge related not to Oakley, but to her 6-year-old sister. Authorities discovered that Jordan and Andrew had failed to give their daughter her prescribed medication for over a year. The medication was crucial for a serious medical condition that, untreated, could lead to severe physical impairment or even death. Later, Jordan and Andrew were charged with 2 counts of child endangerment involving controlled substances. Both of Oakley's siblings had extremely high levels of methamphetamine in their systems, indicating exposure or ingestion. In March 2022, Andrew pleaded guilty to the charges. With no prior criminal history, he received a 12-month prison sentence and was eligible for release in August 2022. Jordan also pleaded guilty in April and was sentenced to 20 months. After her release in January 2023, she faced new charges of fraud and identity theft related to alleged banking scams involving multiple victims. Throughout the investigation, neither Jordan nor Andrew cooperated with authorities. They claimed they last saw Oakley on November 30th, 2021, but refused to say what had happened or where she might be. Oakley had spent most of her early life with a foster family, as both her parents struggled with substance abuse. She was returned to her biological parents' care in 2019, shortly before her 3rd birthday. Her former foster parents, who had raised concerns about her safety, remained active in the search for her. A thorough search of the family's 300-acre property yielded no clues about Oakley's whereabouts. However, police did find blood on the front door and the blinds inside the home. Authorities suspect Oakley may be deceased, but the investigation is ongoing, and no one has been charged in connection with her disappearance. Misty Copsy, a 16-year-old girl from Spanaway, Washington, was last seen on the evening of September 17, 1992, after attending the Puyallup Fairgrounds with her close friend, Trina Bavard. The two had gone to the fairgrounds earlier in the day, and while there, Misty missed the 8:40 p.m. Pierce transit bus that would have taken her home. She called her mother and told her she might get a ride with an 18-year-old friend, Reuben Schmidt. But her mother expressed concern and instructed her to find someone else. Misty decided to walk the 8 miles to her house instead, and she was last seen at 10 p.m. in downtown Puyallup, walking along Meridian toward the westbound on-ramp of Highway 512. She never made it home and was never seen again. The following day, Misty's mother, unable to reach her, became worried and contacted family and friends, discovering no one knew where Misty was. She then reported her daughter missing. Schmidt had been in contact with Misty on the night of her disappearance, but he claimed that he couldn't give her a ride due to a lack of gasoline. Schmidt later became a key figure in the investigation, as he was one of the last people known to have had contact with Misty before she vanished. Initially, police assumed Misty had run away from home, as she had a history of being a somewhat troubled teenager. However, as time passed and it became clear that she had not made contact with anyone and had not returned home, the situation began to look more serious. A female classmate later claimed that Misty had called her after her disappearance, saying she was okay, and another classmate thought she saw Misty a few days after her disappearance. Based on these reports, authorities prematurely closed the case, even informing the media that Misty had been found. The case was not reopened for several weeks. In December 1992, after Misty's case had gone cold, police acknowledged that foul play may have been involved. At that point, they began to question the two individuals most closely connected to Misty's disappearance, Trina Bavard and Reuben Schmidt. Bavard was questioned about the events of the evening Misty went missing. She initially claimed that Misty had taken the bus home, but later admitted that this was not the case. Bavard revealed that after Misty had called Schmidt asking for a ride, and after Schmidt refused to help, she and Misty decided to part ways. Bavard said that she walked home, and that Misty had planned to take the bus. However, it was later revealed that Bavard had lied about part of her story. She had not actually walked home. Instead, her 23-year-old boyfriend Michael J. Reiner picked her up. Bavard further claimed that Reiner had been with her when she offered Misty a ride, but that Misty had refused to come along because she didn't trust Reiner. She said Reiner dropped her off at home, and that she told him Misty had taken the bus. Reiner, who had no criminal history as an adult, had been accused of abduction and rape at age 16, but no charges had been filed in the case. When police later interviewed him, Reiner denied having any involvement in Misty's disappearance, and after passing a polygraph test, he was cleared as a suspect. Police also interviewed Schmidt, who admitted that he had spoken to Misty, but he claimed that after their second phone conversation, he suffered from blackouts and could not recall what happened. Schmidt said that he woke up the next morning alone at his grandmother's farm near Enumclaw, Washington. He was questioned about the possibility that he might have harmed Misty during one of these blackouts, but Schmidt gave an ambiguous answer, stating, "I don't know." He was administered a polygraph test, but it yielded inconclusive results. Investigators believe that Schmidt was attempting to influence the results of the test. As the investigation continued, Schmidt remained a person of interest, despite passing a polygraph exam. In 1996, a female friend of Misty's accused Schmidt of rape, but after 2 weeks, she chose not to pursue charges. Schmidt was convicted of theft in 2000, and in 2006, his wife filed a domestic violence protection order against him, claiming that he had threatened to kill her and burn down her house. These incidents kept Schmidt on investigators' radar, but they did not directly tie him to Misty's disappearance. Meanwhile, a small private search party, led by Misty's family and friends, conducted their own investigation. On February 7, 1993, nearly 4 months after Misty had vanished, the group discovered Misty's clothing in a ditch near the intersection of State Highway 410 and Waco Road, close to the Mud Mountain Dam. Misty's jeans, underwear, shoes, and one of her socks were rolled up and covered in mud. The items appear to have been exposed to the elements for a long time. Forensic analysis revealed that there was no blood or semen on the clothing, but 3 red paint chips were found on the jeans. These chips were never conclusively linked to any particular source, as they were lost during the investigation. On February 20th, 1993, police discovered Misty's hair pick and toothbrush about half a mile from the site where her clothes had been found. Both items had been in her purse the night she disappeared. In 2009, a DNA test was conducted on Misty's jeans, and the results came back showing the presence of DNA from an unidentified male. The DNA did not match Misty's, adding further confusion to the case. Misty's mother later reported that Schmidt had made a statement indicating he knew where Misty's body was located, telling others it was 6 miles from where her clothing had been found. Schmidt confirmed making the statement, but he later retracted it, saying he had fabricated the story to get people off his back. Despite this, the police remained interested in Schmidt and conducted additional investigations into his involvement. He took another polygraph test, which he passed. Around the same time, a man named Corey Bober, who had a particular interest in the Green River Killer, began drawing connections between Misty's disappearance and the murders of 2 other young girls, Kimberly DeLank and Anna Chebetnoy. Both DeLank and Chebetnoy had been murdered near Puyallup, and their bodies were found within 100 feet of one another. DeLank's body had been found in 1988 and Chebetnoy's in 1991. Bober theorized that the killings were connected, and because Misty went missing 2 years after Chebetnoy's body was discovered, he speculated that she could be the next victim. Bober contacted Misty's mother and urged her to search the area near the location where DeLank and Chebetnoy's bodies were found. Police acted on a suggestion and searched the area, but no new evidence was found. Although police did not pursue Bober's theory seriously, he continued to advocate for a resolution to Misty's disappearance. He also maintained contact with Misty's mother for years, and while he had no criminal history of violence or sex offenses, he did have a history of drug charges and served time in prison after Misty went missing. Bober was not considered a serious suspect due to his partial alibi, but his continued insistence on his theories led both police and Misty's family to view him with suspicion. However, it was later established that Bober had no direct involvement in Misty's case, and he was never charged with any crime related to her disappearance. In the years following Misty's disappearance, there were sporadic reports of potential sightings of her, but none were ever confirmed. In 2000, the Pierce County Medical Examiner's Office issued a death certificate for Misty, even though her body was never found. Her case remains unsolved, and she is still considered a missing person. Police continue to believe that Misty met with foul play, and they have never ruled out the possibility that she was the victim of a serial killer. Misty Copsy was an excellent student and an athlete in 1992, playing softball, basketball, and volleyball. She was known for her conscientious and level-headed nature, though she was also somewhat naive. She did not have a history of runaway behavior, wasn't sexually active, didn't drink or use drugs, and had no known issues at home. Both of her parents passed polygraph tests and are not considered suspects. Despite the years that have passed, Misty's case remains open. Tyler Christensen, a 19-year-old from Edmonds, Washington, was last seen on April 19, 2016, when he told his family he was going for a jog to a youth group meeting at his church in Mukilteo, Washington. The meeting was about a mile from his home, but Tyler never arrived, and he disappeared without a trace. Authorities initially believed that Tyler may have left on his own accord, and there was speculation that he took a ferry from Kingston, Washington, that night. The last known person to see him was a man who picked him up while he was hitchhiking. According to the man, Tyler appeared to be in good spirits and asked for directions to Shelton, Washington, mentioning that he was planning to go hiking at Olympic National Park. In May of that year, Tyler's dark-colored backpack was found near the High Steel Bridge in Shelton, Washington, which is located a considerable distance from where he was last seen. Inside the backpack were emergency blankets, food, and extra clothing, items that suggested he may have been planning for an extended stay outdoors, though this remains unclear. Tyler was a hard-working, creative young man who was homeschooled and had a strong work ethic, often doing odd jobs for neighbors. He was skilled in making furniture and other items from wood and metal, and he enjoyed hiking and riding his motorcycle. Despite his independent nature, Tyler had no history of mental illness, runaway behavior, or any indication that he was troubled before his disappearance. His family had no reason to believe he would voluntarily leave, and they are left with many unanswered questions about his whereabouts. Tyler's case remains unsolved. Nicole Siro was last seen in Seattle, Washington on March 30th, 2009. Just 2 days earlier, on March 28th, she had been arrested for violating a no-contact order involving her boyfriend, Roosevelt Montgomery Jr., despite the restraining order against her. Siro had recently been evicted from her apartment and had moved in with Montgomery. He picked her up from the King County Jail on March 30th, after she was released. Following her release, Siro visited her mother before leaving with Montgomery. She spent time with several friends later that day, visibly bruised on her face and acting scared, even asking for money. Later that evening, she was seen at a club in the Skyway area without Montgomery. He called her repeatedly on her cell phone, demanding to know where she was. She was last seen getting into his vehicle outside the club. There were multiple unconfirmed reports suggesting that Siro had been shot to death later that night, but police could not confirm these claims. A few days after her disappearance, Siro's pastor, who was also a family friend, reported her missing. Her mother had wanted to contact the police, but hesitated due to her own outstanding warrants. She asked the pastor to take action on her behalf. Siro was receiving monthly public assistance checks, which were held by her pastor. When she failed to pick up her check for April, he became concerned and alerted authorities. Investigators now believe that Siro was the victim of a homicide. On April 9th, Montgomery was arrested after being found driving a stolen white Ford F-250 pickup truck. He had stolen the truck the morning of March 30th and driven Siro around in it on the day she disappeared. When questioned about Siro's whereabouts, Montgomery claimed he had been searching for her but didn't know where she was. After the truck was returned to its rightful owner, it was discovered to have sustained $20,000 worth of damage, and it was full of trash and belongings that didn't belong to the owner. Among the items found were Siro's birth certificate, social security card, and homework. The truck's exterior was covered in mud, suggesting it had been driven off-road. Montgomery was charged with auto theft, and police believe the truck may have been involved in Siro's disappearance and potential murder. Unfortunately, by the time authorities could process the truck for evidence, the owner had already taken it to a body shop, where it was repaired and thoroughly cleaned. Montgomery later suggested that Timothy White Sr., another man who had occasionally dated Siro, may have been involved in her disappearance. White and Montgomery had a violent history due to their rivalry in competing gangs. However, police quickly ruled out White as a suspect, as he was incarcerated on drug charges at the time of Siro's disappearance. White also told investigators that Siro had visited him in jail before she went missing, and during that visit, she was bruised and told him Montgomery had beaten her. Montgomery himself is a career criminal with a lengthy rap sheet, including over 30 arrests for offenses like theft, domestic violence, child abuse, and possession of stolen vehicles. He was considered armed and dangerous by law enforcement. Montgomery allegedly boasted to others about killing Siro and disposing of her body in the Seward Park area of Seattle. However, no charges were brought against him due to a lack of concrete evidence. Despite ongoing investigations, Siro's body has not been found. Her public assistance was discontinued in June 2009, and there have been no attempts to reinstate it. Additionally, there has been no activity on her Social Security number since her disappearance, and her phone calls go straight to voicemail. Nicole Siro was born in Chicago, Illinois, and moved to Seattle as a child after her father was imprisoned. She grew up in the foster care system and had a minor criminal record, including charges for possession of alcohol by a minor and driving without a license or insurance. Following her disappearance, she missed a scheduled court hearing in a domestic violence case, leading to a warrant being issued for her arrest. Despite extensive searches, investigators have yet to find Siro's body, and her case remains unsolved. Foul play is strongly suspected in her disappearance, and Montgomery remains the prime suspect. Marie Burr was just 8 years old when she disappeared from her home on North 14th Street in Tacoma, Washington, in the early hours of August 31st, 1961. The events leading to her disappearance remain one of the most haunting cold cases in Washington state history. Marie shared a bedroom with her 3-year-old sister, who had a broken arm and was restless that night. Around 1:30 a.m., Marie brought her sister to their parents' room, saying the cast was bothering the younger girl. Their parents sent them back to bed, never imagining it would be the last time they saw their eldest daughter. When Marie's mother woke at 5:30 a.m., she discovered her daughter missing. The front door, locked and chained the night before, was ajar. A small living room window, left slightly open for air, was now wide open, with a piece of red thread caught in the frame. Outside the window, authorities found a garden bench, seemingly used to gain access, and faint footprints distorted by heavy rain. These prints, likely from a size 6 or 7 kid sneaker, hinted at a small adult or teenager as the possible abductor. Police treated Marie's disappearance as an abduction from the outset. Neighbors reported seeing an unidentified person peering into the Burrs' windows in the days prior, though they couldn't describe the individual. Investigators questioned local sex offenders and polygraphed a teenage neighbor who failed the initial test, but passed a subsequent one. Despite these efforts, no substantial leads materialized. The case drew significant media attention, with ransom claims and false confessions complicating the investigation. None of these leads panned out, and Marie's trail went cold. The case took a chilling turn in the 1970s when serial killer Ted Bundy became a suspect. Bundy lived just blocks away from the Burr family home in 1961 and would have been 14 at the time of Marie's disappearance. Some reports suggest he knew Marie, though the extent of their acquaintance is unclear. Bundy, later convicted of murdering at least 30 women across several states, always denied involvement in Marie's case. However, many experts and law enforcement officials believe she may have been his first victim. Despite confessing to numerous murders before his execution in 1989, Bundy never admitted to abducting Marie. Some speculate that if he had been involved, the crime might have been his first, possibly explaining why he remained silent about it. Marie's disappearance left a deep scar on her family and community. Her parents, deeply affected, adopted another daughter a few years later, but never stopped searching for answers. Marie's father passed away in 2003, and her mother followed in 2008, never knowing what happened to their daughter. Today, her siblings continue to seek closure. The case remains open, whether Ted Bundy was responsible or another unknown perpetrator took Marie that rainy night. Her fate remains a tragic, unsolved mystery. Chris Bridgeman was last seen on January 1st, 1963, in Thurston County, Washington. On that New Year's Day, he was spending time with his 6-year-old son during a visitation period at the Barrett Motel on Martin Way East. Bridgeman left the motel room, telling his son that he needed to go see his father. He never returned. 2 days later, when Bridgeman still hadn't come back, the hotel manager took the young boy to his uncle's house, marking the beginning of a mystery that has haunted the family for over 6 decades. At first, Bridgeman's children believed their father might have left intentionally. Chris had been a country singer and guitar player, known locally for his musical talent. He had even recorded a hit song that frequently played on local radio stations. Given his passion for music, the idea that he might have left to pursue a career in the industry seemed plausible. But as the years passed, that explanation began to seem less and less likely. Investigators now believe that Bridgeman did not disappear of his own accord. There's no evidence that he started a new life elsewhere. The Social Security Administration has no record of earnings or activity under his name since 1963. Moreover, None of his friends or family members have heard from him in the decade since he vanished, suggesting something far more sinister may have happened. The family's suspicions have long centered on Bridgeman's father, a man known for his bad temper and possible mental health issues. Bridgeman Sr. claimed he had reported his son missing, but authorities found no record of any report being filed at the time. In fact, the official missing persons report wasn't filed until decades later. Adding to the suspicion, Bridgeman's driver's license was found among his father's belongings after his death in 1993. The discovery raised chilling questions about what might have happened that day in 1963. Some members of the family believe that Bridgeman Sr. murdered his son and buried the body in the basement of his home. The theory gained enough traction that, in 2005, investigators conducted a thorough search of the basement. However, they only found animal bones, no trace of Chris Bridgeman. Despite this, the suspicion has never entirely gone away. Bridgeman's father's history of violent behavior and mental instability continues to cast a long shadow over the case. Chris Bridgeman's disappearance remains unsolved, and the lack of answers has left his family in limbo for more than 60 years. Kelsey Collins, 18, was last seen at 5:30 p.m. on May 9, 2009, when she left her home in Everett, Washington, to meet her boyfriend in Seattle. She planned to travel by public transportation, either the Sound Transit number 510 or Metro number 101-358, but she never arrived in Seattle and has not been heard from since. Her phone was turned off around 8 p.m. on the day of her disappearance, and she was carrying only a small black purse with a few dollars in cash, her identification, her MP3 player, and a hairbrush. At the time of her disappearance, Kelsey had a troubled past. Her parents divorced when she was 3 years old, and her stepfather was abusive toward her mother, and her siblings. When Kelsey was 7, her mother fled with her children to another state and changed their identities to escape her stepfather. He is now serving a 20-year prison sentence. As she grew older, Kelsey began experiencing behavioral issues. She ran away from home at 12, became truant, became sexually active, and struggled with alcohol and drugs. She eventually became involved in prostitution after dating an older man who turned out to be a pimp. She worked in Seattle and Portland under various pimps. Despite her mother's concerns over the abuse she endured, Kelsey denied it. She was arrested for prostitution at the age of 16. In 2008, Kelsey agreed to testify against her pimp, Danica Childs, in a case involving interstate sex trafficking of minors. However, she continued working as a prostitute, and just days before her scheduled testimony in April 2009, she was arrested again. She disappeared a few weeks later, and authorities suspect her disappearance may be connected to her decision to cooperate in the investigation against Johnson. The case against Johnson and his associate Lisa Miles was dismissed in March 2010 due to Kelsey's unavailability to testify. However, Johnson later pleaded guilty to trafficking a minor in another case and was sentenced to 15 years in prison. Miles took a plea deal and was sentenced to probation. Kelsey's family believes her disappearance was a direct result of her decision to testify, and they suspect she was targeted because of it. Despite her difficult lifestyle, it was uncharacteristic for Kelsey to cut off contact with her family, and they believe she would not have left voluntarily. Kelsey was a student at Mariner High School in 2009 and had a learning disability, which made it all the more unlikely for her to disappear without a trace. Her case remains unsolved, and there have been no charges filed in connection with her disappearance. Travis Coleman, 33, was last seen in Wenatchee, Washington, on April 22, 2023. The circumstances surrounding his disappearance suggest he may have been going through a mental health crisis. The day before, on April 21st, Coleman walked away from his construction job near Mission Creek in Kashmir, Washington, and instead of returning home, he spent the rest of the day and night in the Wenatchee Mountains. The following morning, Coleman contacted his family, and several hours later, he returned to his apartment on Montana Street near Morris Park, after having been missing for approximately 30 hours. However, Just hours after returning, he disappeared again from his home at about 5:30 p.m. and has not been heard from since. His mother has criticized the police response to his disappearance, stating that they failed to follow proper missing person investigation procedures and did not initiate an official search for 17 days. In the absence of formal help, his family and volunteers conducted their own search, using horseback and off-road vehicles to comb the Butler Ridge area and surrounding hills near Wenatchee. Over 3 weeks after Travis went missing, his belongings were discovered in a meadow in a canyon near Butler Ridge, but there was still no sign of his whereabouts. His family believes that he may have passed away and is somewhere in the mountains, but they still hold on to hope that his body will be found, offering some form of closure. Frances Cannia's disappearance on July 3, 1975, remains one of Bremerton, Washington's enduring mysteries. On that day, the 24-year-old visited a friend to return a borrowed record. He seemed nervous and declined an invitation to stay, an unusual behavior that raised questions in hindsight. That was the last confirmed sighting of him. When Frances's family checked his apartment on Elizabeth Avenue the next day, they found troubling signs. His wallet, car keys, house keys, comb, loose change, and cash were scattered across his dresser, yet the room showed no signs of a struggle. His prized possession, a 1965 Mustang, was parked outside untouched. There was no indication of where Frances might have gone, and he left behind everything he would need for daily life. Frances's disappearance baffled his loved ones and investigators alike. His mother insisted he was in good spirits leading up to his disappearance. He wasn't involved in any troubled relationships, had no known enemies, and had never faced legal trouble. Friends describe him as responsible and not someone likely to vanish without a trace. The circumstances suggest foul play, but no solid evidence or leads have surfaced. Why did Frances seem nervous on the day he disappeared? Did he know something or someone that made him uneasy? Was someone watching or threatening him? These questions lingered decades later. In 2005, after 30 years of silence, Frances's mother obtained a certificate of presumptive death. While she believes her son is no longer alive, the lack of closure remains a heavy burden. No remains have ever been found, and no one has been charged or named a suspect in his case. Alana Carrol was last seen by her grandmother in Battle Ground, Washington, on August 15, 2023. Since that day, she has never been heard from again. At the time of her disappearance, Alana was staying at various residences in northern Clark County, Washington. She frequently traveled on foot and had connections in Portland, Oregon, and Yakult, Washington. Her family officially reported her missing a month later, on September 15th. Alana did not have a phone with her when she disappeared, and there has been no activity on her social media account since. Authorities believe she may have had her identification and food stamp card with her. She also left behind a young son, adding to the urgency of the investigation. In August 2024, a year after her disappearance, authorities announced that they had confirmed Alana was deceased, though her remains had yet to be found. They identified a suspect, Luke A. Grant, who is currently incarcerated on unrelated charges. Alana and Luke knew each other through their involvement in the local drug culture. One witness reported that in late August 2023, Grant had called her in a state of panic. He told her that he had been using drugs with a woman, passed out, and woke up to find her dead. He didn't name the woman, but admitted to placing the body in the trunk of his car. Another associate of Grant's revealed that Grant had brought his car, a Honda Accord, to his house around the same time, asking for paint to change the car's appearance. The car was eventually towed to a crushing yard in October 2023 and then shredded at a recycling facility, potentially destroying key evidence. Authorities are currently investigating Grant, not for causing Alana's death, but for the improper disposal of her remains. As of now, no charges have been filed, and Alana's body has not been located. Laurel Briden was last seen at the Factoria Mall in Bellevue, Washington, on the afternoon of November 8, 2011. She had been at the mall around 3 p.m., and from that moment, she seemingly vanished without a trace. No one has heard from her since, leaving her family and friends deeply concerned and desperate for answers. For nearly 3 weeks, there were no clues as to Briden's whereabouts. Then, on November 28th, authorities located her vehicle, a burgundy 1991 Ford Escort with Washington license plate number 075ZOZ. The car was found abandoned in the 4200 block of 124th Avenue Northeast, just a short distance from the Factoria Mall and near the apartment of her boyfriend, Mark Frisbee. Despite its proximity to these key locations, there were no signs of Briden at the scene. The discovery of her car raised more questions than answers, deepening the mystery surrounding her disappearance. Those close to Briden immediately recognized that her vanishing was highly uncharacteristic. She was a reliable and responsible person, not someone who would simply leave without a word. At the time of her disappearance, Briden lived in Redmond, Washington, and her case was taken on by the Redmond Police Department. Friends and family held out hope, but the lack of evidence made the situation increasingly grim. In November 2022, a breakthrough in the case came when Briden's boyfriend, Mark Frisbee, was charged with second-degree murder in connection to her disappearance. Frisbee had been a person of interest from the very beginning of the investigation. Authorities revealed that his criminal record included misdemeanor convictions for assault and driving under the influence, as well as a felony assault conviction that occurred after Briden went missing. These troubling details cast a long shadow over his character and his potential involvement in Briden's case. Although investigators have yet to locate Briden's body or identify a specific crime scene, they uncovered compelling evidence linking Frisbee to her suspected murder. DNA matching Briden's was found on a knife that Frisbee had pawned shortly after her disappearance. Adding to the suspicion, records showed that Frisbee purchased cleaning supplies the morning after Briden was last seen alive. These pieces of evidence painted a disturbing picture and led to the formal charges against him. As of now, Frisbee is awaiting trial. While prosecutors work to build their case, Briden's loved ones continue to grieve her loss and hope for closure. Despite the passage of time, foul play is strongly suspected due to the mounting evidence against Frisbee and the circumstances surrounding her disappearance. For those who knew Laurel Briden, they remember her as a kind, caring person whose life was tragically cut short. Even without a body or definitive proof of what happened to her, the charges against Frisbee have given her family some measure of hope that justice will eventually be served. Danica Childs, a young woman from Federal Way, Washington, disappeared on December 21, 2007, under circumstances that remain unclear. At the time, Danica was staying at a friend's house, and she spoke to her mother, Diane Zorro, earlier that day. During their phone conversation, Danica mentioned that she would be going Christmas shopping with her sisters and friends, and that she would return home later. However, after that call, her family never heard from her again. Several hours after her disappearance, Danica's purse, coat, and cell phone were found at the Sunset Motel in Kent, Washington. Authorities later discovered that Danica had spent the night there before her disappearance, leaving behind these personal belongings. The Sunset Motel is known for its high levels of drug and prostitution activity, which raised alarming questions about the circumstances surrounding her disappearance. After Danica's belongings were found, her mother, Diane Zorro, managed to break into her daughter's phone by cracking the passcode several days after her disappearance. She discovered messages that had been left on the phone after their final conversation, and these messages indicated that Danica may have been involved in prostitution, something her family was unaware of at the time. These messages had not been listened to before, and they began shortly after Danica last spoke to her mother, suggesting she may have vanished not long after that conversation. Danica had been a diligent and promising student in high school. She was recommended for a dual enrollment program, where high school students could attend community college and earn both high school and college credit. Despite her academic achievements, Danica struggled in this program and eventually transferred to an alternative school. She briefly dropped out to pursue her GED, but changed her mind and re-enrolled. Danica was on track to graduate when she went missing. In the dual enrollment program, Danica met a fellow student whom she began dating. After her disappearance, her mother learned that Danica's boyfriend was a pimp. Diane believes this relationship played a significant role in her daughter's entry into prostitution, a lifestyle she had not known about prior to Danica's disappearance. Authorities initially speculated that Danica may have left of her own accord and could be in the company of an adult male. However, her mother has always believed her daughter might have been a victim of human trafficking and that she may have been coerced or is being held against her will. Danica's case remains unsolved. Guadalupe Castro, a woman from Longview, Washington, was last seen on November 26, 2001, along with her 3-year-old daughter, Agueda Elizabeth Arias. On that day, they were planning to go shopping in Portland, Oregon with Guadalupe's estranged husband, Gregorio Arias Ibel, to buy clothes for Guadalupe's unborn baby. Although Guadalupe and Gregorio had been living apart at the time, they were considering reconciliation. She and her daughter had been living with Guadalupe's parents for about a year before their disappearance. The family was traveling in Gregorio's Jeep Cherokee, which was later found abandoned in Kerman, California, some distance away from Longview. The vehicle was parked at the home of one of Gregorio's relatives, and a message was left on the relative's answering machine by Gregorio. There was no sign of either Guadalupe or Agueda at the scene, and the family's clothes were also left behind. The circumstances of their disappearance were unclear, but the Jeep's presence in Kerman raised several questions. Both Guadalupe and Gregorio were originally from central Mexico, and while Gregorio was not a legal resident of the United States and had been traveling back and forth between the U.S. and Mexico, Guadalupe and Agueda were American citizens. Guadalupe had a job in Washington and was closely tied to her family and her Pentecostal church, making her disappearance even more puzzling. An anonymous phone call to Guadalupe's family in the aftermath of her disappearance suggested that Guadalupe was in Tucson, Arizona, and was ill. However, the caller did not provide any further details, and the authorities could not confirm if the information was accurate. It remains unclear whether the call was a credible lead or a false tip. The mystery deepened when Gregorio's family claimed that he and his sister, Regina Arias Ibel, had disappeared on the same day as Guadalupe and Agueda. Regina, who was 19 years old at the time, had also gone missing, but it was never clear if she was involved in her brother's disappearance. Regina was described as Hispanic, 5 feet 2 inches tall and 110 pounds, with black hair and brown eyes. In 2020, a major breakthrough came when Agueda and Gregorio were located together in Guadalajara, Jalisco, Mexico. Agueda, now 22 years old, was confirmed through DNA testing, and she was able to obtain a U.S. passport. This discovery raised more questions, particularly because there was still no sign of Guadalupe. The fate of Gregorio's sister, Regina, also remained uncertain. Guadalupe's mother passed away in 2007 without ever knowing what happened to her daughter, but her father and siblings are still alive and actively seeking answers. Guadalupe's father, in particular, has long believed that his daughter was murdered, though no evidence has confirmed this theory. The search for Guadalupe continues, and her family remains determined to find out the truth about what happened to her and Agueda on that fateful day in 2001. In 2004, Marian Carver lived in Boston, Massachusetts, where she was known for her independent, vivacious personality and her love for writing poetry. That August, she decided to take a vacation, booking a cruise aboard the Mercury, a ship owned by Celebrity Cruises. Marian boarded the vessel in Seattle, Washington, on August 27th, looking forward to a relaxing journey that would take her to several stops, including Juneau, Skagway, and Ketchikan in Alaska, and Prince Rupert in British Columbia. However, Marian would never disembark at any of these ports. She was last seen by a cabin attendant the following day, August 28th. From that point on, there were no confirmed sightings of her, and the ship made its way toward its final destination, Vancouver, British Columbia. The cruise ended on September 3rd when the Mercury docked in Vancouver, but there was no clear evidence that Marian got off the ship. There were no records of her disembarking in Vancouver, and she failed to board her return flight back to Massachusetts. She has not been heard from since. It wasn't until September 7th, when Marian's family reported her missing that authorities learned of her disappearance. Marian's family had no idea she was even on a cruise. The detective investigating her case uncovered the truth after accessing her credit card records, revealing that she had indeed booked the trip. In the days following her disappearance, Marian's father contacted Celebrity Cruises for more information. The cruise line confirmed that Marian had boarded the Mercury, but it seemed she had vanished somewhere during the voyage. Disturbingly, Marian had left all of her personal belongings, including clothing, behind in her cabin when she disappeared. The cruise line failed to notify authorities about Marian's disappearance until her father reached out. By that time, most of her possessions had been given away to charity, and her purse, containing important documents, computer disks, and her keys, had been placed into storage. An employee who had handled this was later fired for failing to report Marian's absence to the ship's security office, which was against the company's regulations. As the investigation continued, it became apparent that Marian had not used her sea pass, a credit card and identification card that passengers are required to use on board. She hadn't bought anything during the trip and was not recorded as having left the ship at any of its scheduled stops. Unfortunately, the ship did not keep records of passengers leaving in Vancouver, so there was no way to confirm whether Marian had gotten off the ship there. In March 2005, Marian's parents filed a lawsuit against Celebrity Cruises, seeking answers for their daughter's mysterious disappearance. In response, the cruise line issued a statement suggesting that Marian had died by suicide, possibly by jumping overboard. They pointed out that her cabin was near an open-air deck, which seemed to support their theory. While it was true that Marian had struggled with suicidal thoughts after her divorce years earlier, her family vehemently disputes the notion that she took her own life. They describe Marian as a spirited, independent woman who was deeply involved in poetry and had a strong connection to her family. At the time of her disappearance, Marian was unemployed and living off a trust fund and her investments. She had a child, and her family believes it is highly unlikely she would have voluntarily left her loved ones behind, especially her young child. Authorities in both Massachusetts and Alaska are still investigating Marian Carver's case, but her disappearance remains a mystery. The legal proceedings against Celebrity Cruises are ongoing, as Marian's family continues to seek justice and answers about what happened to her. Marie Burr was last seen on the evening of December 13, 1977, while working alone at a boutique located in the 18800 block of Bothwell Way Northeast in Bothell, Washington. Typically, she would have had company during her shift, but due to a scheduling mix-up, she found herself alone that night. When Burns' sister-in-law arrived at 9 p.m. to help her close the store, she discovered an unsettling scene. Mary was nowhere to be found, and the boutique's lights were off. The doors were left unlocked, which was highly unusual. Even more alarming was the discovery of 29 rounds of .22 caliber ammunition scattered across the floor inside the store. Burns' car was still parked outside, undisturbed. Inside the store's fitting room, her eyeglasses and one of her earrings were found, but her purse was missing. These clues suggested that whatever had happened to Mary was sudden and likely violent. Witnesses reported seeing a man speaking with Burns in the store before she disappeared. This man was described as being between 6 feet 3 inches and 6 feet 4 inches tall, with dark brown hair, brown eyes, and an angular face. Authorities soon announced they were seeking this individual for questioning. The investigation quickly zeroed in on Robert Elmore Taylor, a dangerous convict with a violent past. Taylor had previously escaped from a Michigan prison, where he had been serving time for murder. Just a month after Burns' disappearance, in January 1978, he committed another crime that would ultimately lead to his arrest. Taylor robbed a massage parlor in Bothell at gunpoint, kidnapping 2 of its female employees in the process. However, his plan backfired when one of the women managed to wrestle the gun away from him and shot him twice in the abdomen. Taylor was apprehended shortly afterward. When police searched Taylor's residence, they found damning evidence linking him to Burns. Clothing stolen from the boutique was discovered hanging in his closet. Even more incriminating, merchandise bought with Burns's credit cards was found in his possession. Sales clerks identified Taylor as the man who had used the cards, and handwriting experts confirmed that the signatures on the receipts matched his handwriting. Shockingly, Taylor had signed the slips using Burns's husband's name. Despite the overwhelming circumstantial evidence, Taylor was never formally charged with Burns's disappearance. By the time authorities had built a solid case against him, Taylor had already been convicted of kidnapping and robbery related to the massage parlor incident and received a staggering 240-year prison sentence. Law enforcement officials reasoned that Taylor would spend the rest of his life in prison, even without a conviction for Burns's case. However, justice was cut short. In 1979, Taylor was murdered by another inmate, effectively closing a chapter in the investigation. With Taylor's death, the momentum behind finding Burns stalled, and the case eventually grew cold. To this day, Marie Burns's body has never been found.